There's this guy I know who spent 37 years at the same company, decent salary, maxed his 401k. Every year did everything the financial planners told him to do. He retired at 60, too, with about $1.2 million saved up. 3 years later, he's sitting in a retirement home common room because his knees are shot, his back is destroyed, and that RV trip across America he always talked about never happening. He's got the money. He just doesn't have the body anymore. Meanwhile, his former coworker who quit at 56 just sent me a photo from Patagonia. Same savings roughly, different life entirely. And the weird part is both of them followed the rules. One just knew about a different set of rules. So here's my question. What's the point of having money you're too broken to spend? I'm going to explain how a little-known IRS provision called the Rule of 55 works, why it might be the most important loophole in retirement planning that almost nobody talks about, and more importantly, why the math that makes sense on a spreadsheet can be completely wrong when you factor in what actually happens to your body and your brain between 55 and 70. Because this isn't really about early retirement. It's about whether you want to spend your healthy years working or living. Here's a central metaphor I want you to hold in your mind. Retirement accounts are like fruit. Stay with me. There's a window when that fruit is perfectly ripe. Pick it too early, and you pay a penalty, literally a 10% early withdrawal fee from the IRS. Wait too long, and sure, the fruit gets bigger, more compound growth, looks great on paper, but you might not have the teeth to eat it anymore. The Rule of 55 is about understanding exactly when your specific fruit is ripe. And the answer for a lot of people is way earlier than the retirement industrial complex wants you to believe. So what is this rule? The IRS, in their infinite wisdom, created a provision that says if you leave your job in or after the year you turn 55, you can take penalty-free withdrawals from your current employer's 401k or 403b plan. Notice I said current employer. This is critical. You still pay ordinary income tax, but that 10% early withdrawal penalty that usually applies before age 59 and a half gone. Completely waived. Now, most people have never heard of this because the financial services industry has zero incentive to tell you about it. Think about who benefits when you keep working and keep contributing to your 401k for another 5 or 10 years. It's not you. It's the asset managers collecting fees on larger account balances. The incentives are completely misaligned. And this is where things start getting interesting. Here's the first layer most people miss. This rule only works with your current employer's plan. If you've already rolled that money into an IRA, you're locked out. The Rule of 55 doesn't apply to IS at all. So you've got this narrow window where the money needs to be sitting in that specific employer plan when you separate from the company. And by separate, I mean retire, quit, get laid off, whatever. The departure event is what triggers your eligibility. But here's where it gets tactical. Let's say you've changed jobs a few times over your career. You've got old 401ks sitting at previous employers. You can actually roll those old plans into your current employer's plan before you leave, thereby bringing them under the Rule of 55 umbrella. But you have to do this before you walk out the door. Once you've separated, that window closes. Now you might be thinking, okay, so I can access my 401k early without a penalty. Why does that matter so much? This is where the psychology starts to override the math. And it's where most financial advisors completely miss the plot, because they're not trained to think about anything except compound returns and Monte Carlo simulations. They're optimizing for account balance at death, not quality of life while living. Here's a story. Back in 2019, I met with a guy who ran a successful medical device company. He was 54, completely burned out, hated every day at the office, but his financial advisor kept showing him these charts about how if he worked until 65, he'd have an extra $900,000 due to compound growth. The math was right. The advice was catastrophically wrong. This guy was developing stress-related health issues. His marriage was hanging by a thread, and he hadn't seen his grandkids in months because he was always traveling for work. I asked him a simple question: how much money do you need to be happy? He thought about it and said probably $2 million would cover everything he wanted to do. I pulled up his account. He already had $2.1 million. The advisor was optimizing for a number this guy didn't even need at the expense of the only truly finite resource he had: time. That's escalation number one. The financial services industry is solving for the wrong variable. They're maximizing wealth at the end point. You should be maximizing utility over the entire timeline, and utility peaks when you still have your health. Which brings us to the second escalation. The biology of aging is not linear, and retirement spending follows a pattern that proves it. There is this well-documented curve called the retirement spending smile. People spend the most money in the first 5 to 10 years of retirement. They travel, they do projects, they're active. This is called the go years. Then spending drops significantly during what they call the slow-go years. You're still active, but less ambitious, more content with smaller pleasures. Then at the end, spending spikes again during the no-go years. But now it's all healthcare, assisted living, medical procedures, nurses. Not exactly the travel budget you envisioned. The curve looks like a smile when you plot it out. High at both ends, low in the middle. But here's what that curve is really telling you. The experiences you value most, the ones that require physical capability, those have an expiration date, and that date arrives a lot sooner than 65. I've looked at the actuarial data. Between 55 and 65, you're statistically in your last decade of high mobility health. After 65, the probability of a major health event limiting your physical capability increases dramatically every single year. Knees go, hips go, energy levels crater. You're still alive, maybe for another 20 or 30 years. But the version of retirement you imagined at 45, that version requires the body you have at 57, not 72. So the rule of 55 isn't just about accessing money early. It's about accessing money during the window when that money can buy experiences you will literally never be able to purchase again at any price. You can't buy youth. You can't buy new knees that let you hike Machu Picchu. And the going rate for regret is infinite because there's no market for it. This is a one-way door. Now, here's a third escalation, and this is where I see smart people make dumb mistakes. They assume working longer is always better because more time equals more compound growth. Let me show you why that's not necessarily true and why your personal health trajectory matters more than the S&P 500's average return. Let's say you've got $500,000 in your 401k at 55. If you leave it there and keep working until 65, contributing another, let's say $25,000 a year, and assuming a 6% average annual return, you'd end up with roughly $1.1 million. That's real money. The advisor shows you that chart and says, see, you're walking away from $600,000 of growth. If you retire, no. But this analysis is incomplete because it ignores three things. First, the money you withdraw early and spend, that has utility. Now, a trip to Japan with your spouse, while you can still walk 10 miles a day, has more value than the same trip at 70 when you need a wheelchair. Utility isn't linear with dollars. Second, those 10 extra years of work, you're trading the highest quality decade of your post-career life. That's not free, that's the cost. And third, here's the part that makes me laugh at how badly people misunderstand their own risk tolerance. You're assuming you'll make it to 65 and conditioned to enjoy any of that money. I'm not being morbid, I'm being statistical. The odds that you experience a serious health event between 55 and 65 that limits your mobility or forces early retirement anyway, about 1 in 4 for men. So there's a 25% chance your plan to work until 65 fails, not because you changed your mind, but because your body did. And in that scenario, you traded years of potential enjoyment for extra money you now have to spend on medical care instead of experiences. The math starts looking very different when you price in biological risk. Here's a quick comedic cutaway. I was talking to a guy recently who said he couldn't retire at 56 because he needed to hit a number. I asked what the number was. He said 3 million. I asked what he planned to do in retirement. He said travel a bit, play golf, see the grandkids. I pulled out a calculator and ran a 4% withdrawal rule. That's $120,000 per year. His current spending $60,000. I asked what he planned to do with the other $60,000 annually. He said, I don't know. Save it. Brother, the retirement plan is to retire. You can't save your way into the grave. Now, the fourth escalation is the part nobody talks about because it makes the entire financial advisory industry uncomfortable. The tax arbitrage opportunity of retiring early might actually make you wealthier than working longer depending on how smart you are about Roth conversions. Here's how this works. When you're working, you're probably in the 22 or 24% tax bracket, maybe higher. Every 401k contribution saves you tax at that rate. Great. But in retirement, especially early retirement, before Social Security kicks in at, let's say, 67, you might have years where your income is very low. If you're pulling from a taxable brokerage account or Roth money, your taxable income could be minimal. Those are called the golden years for Roth conversions. You can convert money from your traditional 401k or IRA into a Roth, paying tax at a much lower bracket, maybe 12% or even 10%. The money then grows tax-free forever, and your heirs inherit it tax-free. But here's the kicker. If you're using the rule of 55 and pulling substantial income from your 401k just to live on, you're filling up those low brackets with ordinary income. Now there's no room left to do strategic Roth conversions. You've lost the arbitrage opportunity. This is why some people actually structure early retirement with a mix. Live off taxable accounts or Roth contributions for the first few years. Keep 401k withdrawals minimal and use that space to do conversions. By the time Social Security starts, you've repositioned a huge chunk of your tax-deferred money into tax-free Roth territory. The result? You might end up with more after-tax wealth than if you just kept working and contributing. The system rewards people who understand the game. Let me give you a concrete case study with real numbers, so this doesn't stay theoretical. I'm going to call him David. Not his real name, but real situation. David is 54, works in tech, makes $180,000 a year. He's got $1.3 million in his current employer's 401k, another $200,000 in old 401ks from previous jobs, and about $150,000 in a taxable brokerage account. He also owns his home outright, no mortgage. His annual spending is around $70,000. He's exhausted, hates his job, but his advisor keeps telling him to work until 65 to maximize Social Security and let the 401k grow. Here's what I walked him through. First, before he quit, we rolled those old 401ks into his current employer's plan. Now he's got $1.5 million total in that plan, all eligible for Rule of 55 treatment. He separates from the company the month he turns 55. Now he's got penalty-free access to that $1.5 million. His plan is to withdraw $40,000 per year from the 401k. That covers more than half his annual spending. The rest comes from the taxable brokerage account, which he can tap without any penalties or tax complications beyond capital gains, which at his income level are pretty low. At $40,000 of 401k income, plus maybe $10,000 in capital gains from the brokerage, his total taxable income is only about $50,000. He's in the 12% federal bracket, he's covering his $70,000 annual spending, and he's got room to convert another $25,000 from the 401k to a Roth and still stay in the 12% bracket. He does this every year until he turns 63, when he decides to turn on Social Security early at a reduced benefit. Over those 8 years, he's converted $200,000 to Roth at low rates, and he spent his healthiest years traveling and with family. The math works. The life works better. But here's where people get tripped up. Not every 401k plan allows in-service distributions before 59.5. You need to check with your plan administrator or HR. Some plans are restrictive. Some require you to take your distribution as a lump sum. Others let you set up systematic withdrawals. You need to know the rules of your specific plan before you make any moves. And here's another pitfall. Healthcare. When you leave your employer, you lose employer sponsor or health insurance. Medicare doesn't start until 65.6. That's a 10-year gap you have to bridge. And health insurance on the individual market can cost anywhere from $500 to $2,000 per month, depending on your state and your subsidy eligibility. This is a real cost. It needs to be in your budget. Some people blow up their entire early retirement plan because they didn't model healthcare accurately. There's a tool on Vanguard's site where you can estimate healthcare costs in retirement. There are also tools like Baldwin or the free FINRA retirement calculator where you can run Monte Carlo simulations. These aren't perfect, but they give you a probabilistic sense of whether your plan survives different market conditions. A good money column model will tell you that with your savings, spending, and asset allocation, you have, say, an 85% chance of not running out of money over 30 years. If that number is below 70%, you're taking too much risk. Now, about asset allocation. The conventional advice is to shift more into bonds as you age. The old rule was your age in bonds. So it's 60% bonds, 40% stocks. That's overly conservative for most people now, given longer lifespans and low bond yields. But if you're retiring early and your portfolio needs to last 40 years instead of 30, you actually need more stocks to keep pace with inflation and generate growth. I personally run about 75% stocks, 25% bonds, and cash. And I'm comfortable with that volatility because I have a long time horizon, but that's me. Your risk tolerance might be different. The point is, retiring early doesn't mean you can de-risk your portfolio. In some ways, it means you need to take more equity risk to make the math work. That's uncomfortable for a lot of people. It's worth really thinking through how you'd react if the market dropped 30% the year after you retire. If the answer is, I'd panic and sell, then maybe you need to work another few years to build more cushion or structure your withdrawals differently to avoid selling stocks in a down market. Here's the second comedic cutaway. Someone online told me they couldn't retire until they had $5 million because they wanted to be secure. I asked what secure meant. They said enough that the market can't hurt them. I said, brother, if you've got $5 million and you're worried about the market isn't your problem. Your brain is your problem. No amount of money fixes anxiety. That's therapy territory, not portfolio territory. Now, let me address the objection. I know you're sitting there saying, okay, this all sounds great, but what if I retire at 55 and then hate it? What if I get bored? What if I realize I need more money? Fair questions. Here's the thing. The rule of 55 doesn't require you to withdraw any specific amount, and it doesn't prohibit you from ever working again. It just requires you to separate from that employer. You could take a year off, travel, reset your brain, and then go back to work part-time. You could start a consulting business. You could do contract work. The rule gives you access. What you do with that access is flexible. I know people who use the rule of 55 as a bridge to a portfolio career. They left corporate jobs they hated, took 6 months off, then started doing freelance work in their field at a fraction of the hours and stress. They supplement 401k withdrawals with part-time income, and their lives are dramatically better. That's a completely valid way to use this rule. It doesn't have to be a binary choice between full-time work and complete retirement. But here's what I've learned after reading more SEC filings, tax code, and retirement plan documents than any human should. The system is not designed to optimize for your happiness. It's designed to optimize for institutional cash flow. Employers want you to stay because replacing talent is expensive. Asset managers want your money to stay invested because they collect fees on assets under management. The government wants you to defer taxes as long as possible. Everyone has an incentive for you to keep working and keep deferring. Nobody in the institutional framework benefits from you retiring at 55 and living a lower consumption but higher satisfaction life. What 99% of people do is usually what not to do, and what 99% of people do is work until they're physically forced to stop, then wonder where the time went. They optimize for account balances they'll never spend and postpone experiences until their bodies can't deliver them. They follow the advice of people whose incentives are misaligned, and they end up rich in money and poor in time. So here's my framework. If you're approaching 55 and you're burned out, run the numbers honestly. Not the fantasy numbers where you assume you'll be healthy forever and the market returns 7% every single year with no volatility. The real numbers. What do you actually spend? Not what you think you should spend. What do you actually spend? Add 15% for healthcare and inflation. Now, look at your income sources. 401k, taxable accounts, maybe rental income, maybe a pension if you're lucky. Can you cover that spending without running out of money before 90? If yes, and if you hate your job, what exactly are you waiting for? Here are 3 practical takeaways. First, if you're in your late 40s or early 50s, and most of your money is in old 401ks from previous employers, consolidate them into your current employer's plan now while you're still employed. This brings them under the rule of 55 umbrella. Don't wait, do it this year. Second, model your healthcare costs specifically. Go to the Affordable Care Act marketplace, put in your project, TED income, and see what the subsidies look like. For a lot of early retirees, if you can keep your taxable income under certain thresholds, your health insurance costs are surprisingly manageable. Third, stop thinking about retirement as an on-off switch. Think about it as a dimmer. You can reduce work, change work, freelance, consult. The rule of 55 gives you options. Use them strategically. And one final cynical line: because I can't help myself. The retirement industry sells you a dream of working 40 years so you can be wealthy at 70. But nobody's selling you a coffin with a brokerage statement in it. At some point, you've got to ask yourself, are you building wealth to live or living to build wealth? Because I've seen both versions and only one of them looks like it was worth